Good morning. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 79 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format
here today, and for many of you who have been on this before, you know that in the hybrid format, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a globe. And that globe, if you press it, will give you choices of the language you wish to conduct your meeting in. And so that's one thing. Then again, public health authorities and the Board of Internal Economy have removed the mask mandates wearing indoors. But we still hear from the World Health Organization that masks are still excellent tools to prevent the spread of COVID. Now, I want to take this opportunity to remind all participants you're not allowed to take pictures of the screen. You're not allowed to take pictures of what is going on here. You can get this on the House of Commons website. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, March the 20th, 2023, the committee is meeting to continue its study on tech giants' current and ongoing use of intimidation and subversion tactics to evade regulation in Canada and across the world. Now, we have two witnesses here, and before I do that, I also wanted to remind you, please do not speak unless the chair recognizes you, and please speak through the chair whenever you're speaking. We have, before I go into this, we have the two witnesses here from Meta Platforms, and they are Kevin Chan, who is a Global Policy Director, and Rachel Curran, who is the Head of Public Policy Canada. Now, both of you have a total of 10 minutes, and so you can choose how to use that 10 minutes yourself. I'll give you a 30-second shout-out. Yes, Mr. Julian.
Well, the witness that is not appearing today, Madam Chair, is Nicholas Clegg, who is invited and has not appeared. So I wanted to move, and hopefully we can move quickly on this, that in relation to the committee's study on Google, Facebook, and Bill C-18, that Nicholas Clegg, President of Global Affairs for Meta, be...
All right, go ahead.
I just need a clarification then. Are we entering into committee business because that's normally when motions are moved? Or is this a point of order because motions are not allowed to be moved on a point of order?
I don't think he made a point of order to move a motion. He informed us all beforehand that he was going to make this motion.
Okay, so then it's my understanding that we've now entered into committee business then for him to be able to move this motion?
Pardon? Well, the point is that what he is moving is directly related to the meeting we're doing right now, so he can do that at any time. It's directly related, in fact, to this particular meeting.
Okay, I'll allow him to continue then. Thank you for the clarification, Chair.
Thank you. Peter, you may continue, and then I have a question that I need to ask the Chair with regard to your particular motion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll just state it again, that in relation to the committee's study on Google, Facebook, and Bill C-18, that Nicholas Clegg, President of Global Affairs for Meta, be summoned to appear before the committee for 2 hours on May 15th, 2023. I move the motion. Hopefully this won't engender a lot of discussion. He was invited, he is not appearing. This would be a summons so that he would have an obligation to appear.
Peter, I just wanted to suggest that there was a summons sent on Friday 2 weeks ago for Nicholas Clegg to appear. I just also want to, already made by this committee and passed unanimously, I also wanted to ask the clerk, we had originally, in our very first motion, asked for specific people to come. And I want to ask the clerk what happened when we invited those specific people to come from Meta. And then we sent a summons. And I know that as a chair, the clerk shared with me the fact that Meta decided that they would love to cooperate with the committee and that they would come in, despite the summons, if we sent them an invitation. So we also sent an invitation following the summons. Now, why is it that the people that I was told were going to appear, suddenly somebody had decided not to come on Friday? Can you tell us what the reasons you were given, clerk?
Well, that would be a more appropriate question for the witnesses than myself.
No, but you were informed. You were told as a clerk that Mr. Clegg was not coming. What was the reason given to you when he called on Friday, or they decided on Friday not to renege on that agreement to come?
Again, I would suggest, since the witnesses are here in the room, that would be a more appropriate question.
So
for the
you were not
witnesses.
given any reason. You were just told that they weren't coming. That's it? I'm just trying to clarify for the sake of the committee.
And I would suggest that the witnesses are sitting right here and can clarify. You can get the news right from the witnesses themselves.
Now, we also have a motion on the floor from Peter. Yes, Martin, you're speaking to the motion?
Absolument. Puis, Madame la
Yes, Madam Chair, I find it interesting. I also had questions of clarification on the events and how things have turned out. Indeed, we sent out a summons to witnesses at Meta, and later on there was a request made through our clerk, and we accepted to send out an invitation, but the summons to appear had already been sent out to Meta. Out of courtesy and at their request, I recall, the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, out of courtesy, we sent out an invitation letter. That was a courtesy, and we expected that people invited to appear from Meta would appear, and Mr. Clerk had confirmed his presence. And we believed in Meta's good faith, taking it for granted that Mr. Clerk was bound not only by his commitment to appear following the invitation, but also indirectly by the summons that had been sent out a few days before. So I'm also curious to find out, actually, what were the reasons provided? Why are they dragging us in flour or in the mud? What are the details of the reasons provided at the time when Mr. Clerk's invitation or appearance was cancelled? Because we just realized that he would not be appearing without any details. So, yes or no, were there any reasons given? I don't think it's up to the witnesses to answer that question, because there was a conversation that took place between the clerk and Meta. So I would like the clerk to give us more information for clarification purposes.
Events is accurate. I have Marilyn waiting. I have Peter waiting, but I think you are asking the clerk a specific question.
Ben, en fait, oui, je veux avoir plus de précision.
Yes, I want more details. I would like to find out what was the nature of the summons sent out. Does it become null and void when an invitation is accepted? Does that summons still count? In that sense, I would like to know what reasons were provided. Are they valid reasons for Mr. Clerk's absence? We have received no communication. I want to know the reasons for why he's not appearing. Because we sent an invitation after the summons, and he accepted that he will appear. These are important questions. I would like to find out what the answer is. I would add that the answer we will receive from the clerk will probably guide our positions and our decision on Mr. Julian's motion this morning.
Mike?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, a summons for a sovereign citizen of another country has no effect from this committee. So there's that. So that was relayed back to me from Meta, that There wasn't a need to abide by the conditions of a summons because it had no effect. They extended an offer to have Mr. Clegg appear voluntarily if the framing of the meeting were such that it was an invitation and a collaboration and an effort to work collaboratively with the committee. That was all set up. Then as the events unfolded, I was instructed to alter the title of the committee's study from a generic description to the exact language of the motion, which presented a different framing for the meeting, which was perhaps unpalatable to Sir Clegg.
Est-ce que je peux renchérir là?
May I add something? If I understand you well, he was asking us to change the title of our invitation.
Was sent under a certain title. Subsequent to the invitation being accepted, Mr. Clegg or Sir Clegg being scheduled to appear. When the notice of meeting went out, it had a different title that framed, I believe, and once again, I cannot speak on behalf of Meta. I believe that based on our exchanges, that the framing of this particular meeting with the particular study title was not acceptable to Sir Clegg.
OK, mais on ne vous a pas dit.
But you were not informed clearly that that was the reason for which Mr. Clegg wasn't appearing. It wasn't clearly stated to you that that's the reason for which he wasn't appearing. That's all I want to verify.
You're asking me to provide precisions from Meta, and I'm trying to say that Meta is the people I was, basically discussing the matter with are sitting in the room. So I'm saying perhaps it would be better to ask Meta.
J'essaie pas de vous mettre en bois.
The email that I received from them was the framing of the meeting was no longer acceptable to Sir Nicholas Clegg.
Merci, c'est tout.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know.
And I wanted to say that the framing of the title of this meeting came directly from a motion that was passed unanimously by this committee. So there was nothing strange or new, and it was a public hearing when that motion was passed.
Point
now,
of
Marilyn,
order. Point
yes,
of order.
yes,
Thank
Rachel.
you. Just to correct the record, it was not passed unanimously. There were individuals who abstained. Thank you.
Is that true, Mike? I can't remember. Off the top
It's
of my
true.
head.
Clerk, I would just say that certainly we want to hear from Nicholas. I think that was the intent. But previously, when we had Google here, the title of the meeting was Activities of Google in Reaction to Bill C-18. So I would move to amend the motion that Mr. Julian has made to say, and that the meeting be called Activities of Meta in Reaction to Bill C-18 to provide a more accurate topic and in a more collaborative way. Thank you.
Discussion. You are amending Peter's motion?
Yes, that was my intent.
All right. Does you want to speak to the amendment to Peter's motion? Peter.
Well, if the committee's in agreement, I would accept that as a very friendly and amicable amendment to my motion.
Pardon? Oh, Anthony. Sorry, Anthony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am absolutely in agreement with the motion, although I do note that we, as you have said, Madam Chair, have already summoned Mr. Clegg. We've summoned Mr. Zuckerberg. Neither of them are here. And we summoned another Canadian employee of Meta who is not here either. There are two people here who were not invited by the committee or summoned by the committee. I find that extraordinary, and while I would be prepared at this point to refer this to the House as opposed to summon Mr. Clegg again, I certainly will support summoning Mr. Clegg again. But I do find it strange, given, as you said, Madam Chair, this is all based on a motion that was adopted weeks ago. nothing changed within the scope of the motion that invited or summoned Meta here. And I don't understand how somebody who in a Tuesday letter to the committee agrees to come pulls out on the Friday before the meeting. And if the issue is indeed that Meta doesn't like the way the committee has framed the wording of the meeting, I mean, that is extraordinary too. So Meta wants to dictate to us what legislation we should pass, and they also want to dictate to this committee what we call our meetings. And, I'm aghast. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would like to read the actual motion which Mr. Housefather had proposed and that was passed by this committee. Whether it was unanimous or not, it was actually passed by the committee. And the motion reads that given the dominant market position of Meta and Google and each company's recent actions in Canada, which appear to be attempts to intimidate Parliament and which follows a pattern of repeated subversive tactics used by tech giants across the world to prevent accountability, the committee undertake a study on tech giants' current and ongoing use of intimidation and subversion tactics to evade regulation in Canada and across the world, and that as such, the committee hold a minimum of 5 meetings, and that as part of this study, the committee summoned Meta, and with the names of everyone, Mark Zuckerberg, Nick Clegg, Chris Saniga, and then that Meta platforms provide us with documents which we have not yet received. As you well know, this committee knows that we were sent generic documents which could be found in the public domain, and we also actually subpoenaed those documents, and they have not arrived yet. So let's be very clear what we're talking about here. The committee was asked to study tech giants' current and ongoing use of intimidation and subversion tactics to evade regulation in Canada and across the world. That is the exact wording of the motion. That is the exact wording for this meeting today. So, and in fact, this was done in a public hearing so that Meta was fully well aware, and so was Google and everyone, of what that motion said. So this is not some sort of sleight of hand at all. I just want to be very clear about that. Now, Marilyn, then Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. We also were advised that people that are in the United States are not necessarily legally subject to the subpoenas that we send. So in the spirit of wanting to hear and work collaboratively, Mr. Julian is okay with the amendment to name the meeting as we said, and so I'd like to have that vote.
I will call the vote if there is no one willing to speak to the amendment. So, Marilyn, I will reserve the right to do that. Peter wants to speak.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take a lot of time. Mr. Clegg is a very experienced parliamentarian, and I believe he understood the ramifications of proposing that an invitation be issued. Knowing that in parliamentary terms, what that does is have an impact on the summons. And so that is why I'm proposing a clear summons today that goes forward, that if he chooses not to come on Monday, as he has chosen not to come today, he will be in non-compliance. And there is a process that we have as parliamentarians too. Mr. Clegg, I'm sure, would understand that there are consequences for his refusal to respect our democracy in Canada and our Parliament. Alors, étant donné toute l'expérience qu'il a,
considering all the experience he has and the fact that he understands very well the change of a summons to an invitation, it kind of creates some confusion. So it's important for us to demand that he appear next Tuesday, and if not, we follow whatever processes we have available to us as MPs to show Mr. Clegg that he has to respect our democracy and the parliament that was elected by Canadians.
Is there any further discussion on Ms. Gladou's amendment? No, then I will call the question on the amendment. Those in favor of the amendment? Those opposed? Mr. Housefather, are you voting?
I abstain.
Thank you. Okay, so we now have an amended motion, and so we will vote on the amended motion, or the motion as amended. Those in favor? Fine, so we have now passed an amended motion. As we clarify this, I think Martin Champoux made a very important point. We sent a summons, as the committee had asked us to do. As a result of that summons, we heard from Meta Platforms that they were a little concerned about us summoning them, and that they would like to come and work collaboratively with the committee. And so I think if we think about it, we are simply repeating, even though the motion has passed, exactly what they promised to do, and then they withdrew on Friday. And I think that those are some of the things that I gather everyone is concerned about. Chris, did you wish to speak?
Just quickly on a point of order before we move to the witnesses. I'd like to see them
Thank
sworn in,
you.
please,
Point of
Madam
order?
Chair.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Mike just said they're sworn in already.
Oh, okay, yes, the witnesses have been sworn in. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on May 1st, it was agreed to in this meeting that there would be 15 minutes of business at the end of this meeting. And so I was confused as to why that didn't make it into the notice of meeting, and I would ask that that be accounted for or provided for today.
Okay, I just would like to ask the clerk again to just remind us, was there a vote taken on that idea to come for, to stay an extra 15 minutes today?
There's,
Did we make a vote? Is that the committee deciding we should do that?
there was not an official vote on it. There was some discussion around the invitation to the Auditor General. I believe there was a promise by the block member who is present to also move that motion into. He's given notice of motion, the exact same motion, to have the Auditor General appear at the Industry Committee.
Oh, no,
And there is
Auditor General. It is, well, but it is to spend 15 minutes at the end of this meeting. I'm asking if that motion by Ms. Thomas to spend 15 minutes at the end of this meeting, was it a motion? Was it voted on? Was it passed? I cannot recall that it was. So that's why it's not in the minutes of the meeting, Ms. Thomas. It's not part of the meeting because it was, I don't think it was voted on. Yes.
Madam Chair, there are many decisions that are made around this table through a collaborative approach rather than taking a vote. But if that's something that you require going forward, then I will insist on that. But the decision was made at this table. We do not have blues, unfortunately, but you can pull up CPAC and watch the film. It was agreed to around this table based on a friendly conversation that we would have 15 minutes of committee business at the end of this meeting today.
Then we will have 15 minutes at the end of this meeting today. Okay, thanks. Yes, sorry, Chris, you have a...
Isn't Thursday the open meeting? Didn't we agree? But now Thursday's the open meeting, and we have, I don't know that do we have a set agenda? We have witnesses here right now. Let's move forward. I know the Conservatives may not want to trouble Facebook too much, but let's hear from the witnesses. They're scheduled. The notice of motion has happened. If there's 15 minutes after 1 o'clock, great. If not, let's push it to another time. Witnesses are here.
Just a bit of correction, Mr. Biddle. Thursday is going to be 2 hours with the new president of Soccer Canada, Charmaine Cooks. And on Monday, we were going to have 1 hour of witnesses with regard to safe sport and 1 hour of an in-camera committee meeting. So are you suggesting then that we leave the suggestion that everyone seemed to tell me they agreed to even though there was not a vote, that they all agreed to it. Do they want to do that
I think
today?
the agreement, Madam Chair, was for an extra 15 minutes. If there isn't an extra 15 minutes, then let's just go to the witnesses.
Peter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I cannot stay past 1 p.m. I have to go to the House, so I don't approve or I won't give my consent to extending the committee, but I do believe 15 minutes at the end would be warranted. And we have now summoned Mr. Clegg, so we will be coming back to Facebook potentially next week or discussing a non-compliance with a summons.
15 minutes at the end of the meeting as suggested. Ms. Thomas, did you have something else to add?
I am happy to accommodate Mr. Julian and to have those 15 minutes to take place within the meeting. But I will just clarify that based on that discussion that took place on May 1st, it was agreed to be an extra 15 minutes at the end of the meeting. Clerk, it's your prerogative, and so if you wish to include those 15 minutes within the framework of this meeting, I'm just very much aware that that is limiting our witnesses.
It is limiting our witnesses. Yes, indeed. So, Peter, you're not going to be able to stay for 15 minutes, but it seems to me that the discussion suggested an extra 15 minutes.
Again, Madam Chair, I do not give my consent for the extra 15 minutes. I do believe Mrs. Thomas's request is reasonable. I would suggest we go to committee business with 15 minutes remaining and come back to Facebook next Monday, where hopefully Mr. Clegg will be available to respond to our summons.
Thank you. Now, we have two witnesses that I would introduce, and we said originally that these witnesses would have 10 minutes, and I think the witnesses are Kevin Chan, Global Policy Director for Meta Platforms, Rachel Curran, Head of Public Policy Canada, and you have 10 minutes, so you can divide the 10 minutes as you choose. I will give you a literal shout-out when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you. Please begin.
Madam Chair, members of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, it is a pleasure to once again be before you today. My name is Kevin Chan, and I'm a Global Policy Director at Meta Platforms. I am here with my colleague, Rachel Curran, our Head of Public Policy in Canada. Madam Chair, as you will know, your committee clerk wrote to us on Friday, April 28, to confirm an invitation to appear before this committee for its study on the, and I quote, reaction of companies in the information technology industry to Bill C-18. We were delighted at the opportunity to once again make a representation to the committee of our serious concerns with the Online News Act, and readily agreed to accept the invitation. To demonstrate how serious we took this opportunity, our President, Global Affairs, Sir Nick Clegg, confirmed his participation as our principal witness. Unfortunately, late last Thursday, May the 4th, we were notified by the committee clerk that the title of the hearing was changed to a much more confrontational one that seemingly had nothing to do at all with the Online News Act. Given this development, on Friday, Meta notified the committee that our president would no longer be appearing. I think we were all looking forward to a substantive discussion about C-18 today, much like the thoughtful discussion that occurred at the Senate Standing Committee on Transport and Communications last week. That seemed like a high watermark of legislative deliberation. Madame la Présidente, comme vous le savez...
Madam Chair, as you would know, your committee clerk wrote to us on Friday, April 28, to confirm an invitation to appear before this committee for its study on the, and I quote, reaction of companies in the information technology industry to Bill C-18. We were delighted at the opportunity to once again make a representation to the committee of our serious concerns with the Online News Act and readily agreed to accept the invitation. To demonstrate how serious we took this opportunity, our President, Global Affairs, Sir Nick Clegg, confirmed his participation as our principal witness. Unfortunately, late last Thursday, May the 4th, we were notified by the committee clerk that the title of the hearing was unilaterally changed to a much more confrontational one that seemingly had nothing to do at all with the Online News Act. Given this development, Meta on Friday, notified the committee that our president will no longer be appearing. I think we were all looking forward to a substantive discussion on C18 today, much like the thoughtful discussion that occurred at the Senate Standing Committee on Transport and Communications last week. That seemed like a high watermark of legislative deliberation.
To now share with you the opening statement that our President, Global Affairs, Sir Nick Clegg, had written and was prepared to make for your original study titled Reaction of Companies in the Information Technology Industry to Bill C-18. C'est donc dans cet esprit.
With that in mind, I am pleased to now share with you the opening statement that our President, Global Affairs, Sir Nick Clegg, had written and was prepared to make for your original study titled Reaction of Companies in the Information Technology Industry to Bill C-18.
Madam Chair, my name is Nick Clegg, and I'm President, Global Affairs at Meta. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address this committee. Madam Chair, the Online News Act is based on a fundamentally flawed premise. Meta does not benefit unfairly from publishers sharing links to news content on our platform. The reverse is true. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, the Online News Act is based on a fundamentally flawed premise. Meta does not benefit unfairly from people sharing links to news content on our platform. The reverse is true.
Users choose to share their content because it benefits them to do so, whereas it isn't particularly valuable to us at all. As such, we've taken the difficult decision that if this flawed legislation is passed, we will have to end the availability of news content on Facebook and Instagram in Canada. The truth is, our users don't come to us for news. They come to share the ups and downs of life, the things that make them happy and sad, that interest them and entertain them. Links to news stories are a tiny proportion of that, less than 3% of the content they see in their Facebook feed. But news publishers do find our services valuable. We estimate that Facebook feeds sent registered news publishers in Canada more than 1.9 billion clicks in the 12 months to April 2022. This amounts to free marketing we estimate is worth more than $230 million. Publishers choose to share their content because it drives traffic to their websites. It helps them sell more subscriptions, grow their audience, and display their ads to more people than they might otherwise. The traditional news industry faces profound challenges. New technology has emerged, consumer behavior has changed, and old business models don't work anymore. Of course, everyone wants quality journalism to thrive. But it makes no more sense to claim social media companies are taking money from publishers than to say car companies stole from the horse and cart industry. It seems we're having a debate as if the internet was frozen in time about 10 years ago. The way our users engage with content has changed dramatically. Just in the last year or two, we've seen an enormous shift in people consuming creator content and short-form video. Watching video is now more than half of time spent on Facebook and Instagram. People reshare Reels, our short-form video format, more than 2 billion times every day on Facebook and Instagram, which has doubled in just the last 6 months. The world is constantly changing, and publishers, like everyone else, have to adapt. Asking a social media company in 2023 to subsidize news publishers for content that isn't that important to our users is like asking email providers to pay the postal service for people because people don't send letters anymore. And not all internet companies are the same. We're not Google. They are an amazingly successful company that does extraordinarily useful things for people, but they operate a search engine that functions by using links to news web pages. Meta, by contrast, doesn't solicit, need, or collect content from news websites to put on our services. Our users, and in this case news publishers, choose to share it themselves. Globally, more than 90% of organic views on article links from news publishers are on links posted by publishers themselves. I've heard a lot in this debate about how this legislation is replicating what Australia has done. In fact, the laws are different in important respects, and C18 will go further than the Australian legislation. First, the Australian code doesn't apply to Meta because we haven't been designated by the Treasurer there. If we do end up being designated and forced to pay publishers, we will be faced with the same difficult choice we are making in Canada. But perhaps more significantly, this legislation would make Canada the first democracy to put a price on free links to web pages, which flies in the face of global norms on copyright principles and puts at risk the free flow of information online. Canada and Canadian Liberals have a long-standing reputation for believing in multilateralism and for defending the free and open internet. C18 would be a direct contradiction of that long-held and honorable tradition. I spent 20 years of my life as a legislator, so I understand how difficult it is to craft good policy and sensible legislation. In this instance, I believe C18 is flawed legislation which would deliver bad economic policy too. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates that most of the funds generated by the Act will go to broadcasters, not the local and regional publishers it was supposed to support. It's Robin Hood in reverse. The Act would subsidize big broadcasters at the expense of independent publishers and digital news sites, skewing the playing field so it's even harder for smaller players. Ultimately, this legislation puts Meta in an invidious position. In order to comply, we have to either operate in a flawed regulatory environment, or we have to end the availability of news content in Canada. With a heavy heart, we choose the latter. As the Minister of Canadian Heritage has said, this is a business decision. It's not something we want to do, but it is what we will have to do. En définitive, cette loi
Ultimately, this legislation puts Meta in an unfavorable situation. In order to comply, we have to either operate in a flawed and unfair regulatory environment, or we have to end the availability of news content in Canada. It's with a heavy heart that we choose the latter. As the Minister of Canadian Heritage stated, this is a business decision. It's not something we want to do, but something we will have to do.
And with that, Madam Chair, Rachel and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. I was just about to give you 30-second shout-out, so thank you, Mr. Chan. Now, we will begin our question and answer period, which the first one is 6 minutes. The 6 minutes actually is for the questions and the answers, so I'm going to ask you to be as clear and crisp as you could be. The first question comes from the Conservatives, Ms. Gladue, Marilyn. 6 minutes. Okay, Ms. Thomas then. Thank you.
Thank you. About 3 weeks ago, Bill C-11 was rammed through the Senate. There were amendments suggested originally, but they weren't taken by this government. And then it was sent over to the Senate, and the Senate did not give it the sober second thought that it deserved yet again. So it got pushed through. It now gives this government unprecedented power to control what people can see or say or hear online. And then at the Liberals convention this weekend, they put through another intention, a proposal, and that is that they would actually regulate news sources. So basically, the state would have to approve a journalist's news source. And if the government gives that news source a stamp of approval, then that article can be published. And if the government, through the CRTC, I would imagine, doesn't give that stamp of approval, then of course that article would not be publishable. It's a form of censorship. It's a form of censorship. Now, what's interesting is that a journalist, Paul Wells, who traditionally is very liberal, very, very much inside the pockets of the Liberals, he wrote an article on Friday outlining what's happening here. And he said this. He said, "It is impossible for any government to subsidize journalism without deciding at some early point to exercise its prerogative as an owner." What's interesting is that this government has funded the media to the tune of about $600 million. And so as the owner of much of the media here in Canada, now, of course, there are many fantastic independent sources and alternative sources of media, but the mainstream tends to be largely owned by the government because they're the ones that are keeping them afloat or propping them up with this massive amount of grant money. Now, it would appear, based on their convention, that the Liberals are looking to cash in on this. They're looking to exert their power. Some might call it bullying. In fact, I believe that is how many members of this committee have referred to it when power is misused. It's called bullying.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Biddle.
I don't expect a question in the near future. Just want to clarify that things that are passed at a convention aren't government policy. Those are things by members, and just clarify for people who are listening at home.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Continue, Ms. Thomas.
I believe that was debate. And so having this policy then passed at convention, which often then makes it to the floor of the House of Commons and then, of course, impacts Canadians, is concerning. It's concerning, yes, to Paul Wells and to other journalists, because, of course, it would be an infringement on their ability to function as, well, journalists, which Ms. Hefner often talks about the fact that they're so incredibly trained and should be trusted to tell the stories that they research. And so I'm confused as to why this government wouldn't trust them to tell those stories without first needing to give a state stamp of approval as to their sources. But nevertheless, this government has managed to turn into a bully because they own part of the media. In the same way, Facebook is being put in a position where, or Meta is being put in a position where they will have to enter into contracts, monetary contracts with news sources, which then gives Facebook or Meta an incredible amount of power as well. And it would appear then that they are also using that power to make decisions that have a detrimental impact on Canadians. So I actually see two peas in a pod. I see two sources of tremendous power dictating to Canadians what's going to happen in terms of access to news. I'm curious as to what you would make of that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. Look, we have always, part of our concerns with the Online News Act, with Bill C-18, is the fact that it ties the fate and the fortunes of the Canadian news sector to the fortunes of two American technology companies. And we think that's one of the major flaws, in fact, with the legislation, as you've stated, that it makes the news sector almost entirely dependent on foreign technology companies. So that is one of the points of concern that we have with this piece of legislation.
I guess I just need some further help, though, knowing why is it in the fate of these, why is it in the hands of these two giants?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. That is the way the legislation is drafted, and that's certainly what the minister has indicated also, that this legislation is intended to apply to two American technology companies, to Google and to Meta. Now, I understand there may be some room to scope in other platforms or other technology companies, but for now, very clearly it's directed at Google and at Meta.
Now, it's my understanding that you've entered into several agreements already. Does Meta intend to uphold those agreements or pull from them?
Well, ma'am, I don't know that we have an answer for that. Of course, it depends on what the framework for C-18 will ultimately be. And so we have to understand what is scoped in within C-18 to understand what can and cannot be ultimately on the platform from a news content point of view.
So I'm curious then, for Facebook to continue to carry news and to continue forward with these deals that have been sprung, I think it's 14 or something like that, I'm wondering then, what is required? What is required in terms of legislative change? I mean, right now, Bill C-18 is in the Senate. It's possible to have amendments made. What should those amendments be?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So we have proposed a list of amendments both to this committee and to the Senate. Sorry, Madam Chair?
You speak through the chair, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, we have proposed a list of amendments to this committee and to the Senate committee looking at the bill. One of the primary concerns we have with the bill and amendments we have proposed is to scope out what we call publisher-posted content. So content that's posted voluntarily by news publishers, whether in written text format, in the form of hyperlinks, or audiovisual content to our platforms. And if that were scoped out of the Act, if publisher-posted content were removed from the scope of the Act, we think it would make it a much better piece of legislation. So that is one of the primary amendments we've proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I go to the Liberals. Anthony Housefather, please. Anthony, 6 minutes. Sorry, Anthony, you are muted, I think. We can't hear you. At least I can't hear you. Could we suspend the time for Mr. Housefather while we find out what's going on?
Yeah, I'm very confused, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. So I'm sorry to the witnesses. Witnesses, I'm going to be asking a couple of questions that can be answered by yes or no, or I don't know. Feel free to do yes, no, I don't know. And if I ask you to expand, feel free to expand. Okay. My first question is, Mr. Chan, did you encourage Mr. Clegg not to come here today?
I believe this was his decision.
Did you have any role in that?
Well, of course, I'm an advisor to our president, so of course I would be part of that decision.
And did you agree with that? Did the advice that you gave correspond to his decision?
Well, as all good advisors will do with a former deputy prime minister, you'll appreciate that we will keep that my advice confidential, so that I may be fearless in my advice, and he is the decider.
Has Meta's board of directors discussed the content blocking decision that you've made in the event C18 is adopted?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat it?
Has Meta's board of directors discussed the proposed content blocking in Canada if C18 is adopted? I can't hear your answer, Mr. Chen.
Oh, I said I don't know.
You don't know. Was the decision to do content blocking in Canada if C18 was adopted made exclusively by the Canadian team?
I think there were a number of people involved. I mean, I'm not really part of the Canadian team anymore, as you appreciate, but I think this is concerning on a global level. I don't think, and as I said in the opening statement, we haven't seen any democracy make an attempt to put a value on links, which is concerning.
Mr. Chan, I'm reclaiming my time. If you can answer questions yes or no, I'm asked you to do that. So Mr. Clegg was involved in that decision, yes or no?
President of Global Affairs, he would have been.
Mr. Zuckerberg, was he involved in the decision, yes or no? He was?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. I'm going to focus my questions going forward on the Australian activities of a couple of years ago. Per the Wall Street Journal's reporting of whistleblower documents, Facebook deliberately overblocked Australian Emergency Services health and government pages as part of its news takedown. So I'm going to focus on what I've heard from Facebook whistleblowers in these documents. One of the things that whistleblowers stated was the Australian takedown was carefully planned over months. And as the bill was tabled in the second half of 2020, so many, many months before the eventual decision, Facebook created a special team of product staff and engineers to deal with the content blocking scheme. Has a content blocking team for Canada been created, Mr. Chan?
I'm not aware.
Ms. Curran, are you aware?
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you, Mr. Housefather, through the chair. We do have cross-functional teams working to understand the legislation and to prepare for the removal of news on our platforms, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Curran. I appreciate the way you answer the questions. So let me ask the question then. Per the whistleblowers in Australia, the team that was created for Australia was required to sign NDAs in an unprecedented way. So not the existing NDA that you sign as an employee of Facebook, but a special project-related NDA. Has anybody within Meta been asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement in conjunction with planning for the content blocking in Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. I can only speak for the Canadian team. We have not been asked to sign anything like you reference.
Are there others outside of Canada that would be on this team?
Yeah, we have a broad cross-functional team, Mr. Housefather, working on this file, working to understand the legislation, working to prepare for the ending of the availability of news on our platforms. So it is a large team, yes.
Okay, perfect. And are you aware of any documents that have been created to prepare for the content blocking?
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. I don't know if you're referring to specific documents. Certainly that team's work is underway, and in the normal course of business, they would be, of course, recording the work they do.
Okay, so the committee in its order from March the 20th had requested to receive these documents. I'm wondering, Ms. Kern, if you could tell me why then they haven't been produced yet?
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Yes, my colleague, Mr. Chan, said we're working to comply with the committee's order for document production. We've just got to make sure that we respect confidentiality and various other legal considerations. So we're taking the advice of our legal counsel on this and working very closely with them to make sure that what we're providing is in accordance with all of the laws and rules around these documents.
Perfect. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 1 minute left, a little under 1 minute.
Thank you. Then I have time for one more question. Whistleblowers disclosed multiple company documents in the United States to the United States Department of Justice. As part of a deck, one slide called Product Readiness Timeline states, ideal takedown timing is after legislation has been passed by Senate, but before it receives royal assent. This is, again, the Australian example. The same deck shows that takedown plans needed to be ready for February 5th, a week before Facebook expected earliest passage of the bill. Ms. Curran, that would seem to indicate that takedown was essentially to maximize negotiating leverage in Australia. Is the Canadian model similar, or is the threat similar to what was happening in Australia to maximize negotiating leverage, or is it different?
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. I can confirm that, look, the way Australia unfolded was not ideal. There were some technical errors made in the way that we removed news from our platform. We fully intend that those errors will not be made in the Canadian context, and we're preparing very carefully to ensure that that's the case. We're going to make sure that we're fully transparent with Canadians, with parliamentarians, as we move towards news removal, if we're forced to do that. And of course, Mr. Housefather, that's going to depend on the final scope of C-18, and we don't want to preempt the work of the Senate in that regard.
You're well over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And now we go to the Bloc québécois, Martin Champoux. Martin, 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Meta registered with lobbyists in Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Champoux, and through the chair, yes, we are.
Quand un projet de loi est
When a bill is tabled in the House of Commons, it's discussed in committee, like today, and MPs of all parties meet the interested parties, concerned organizations to share their concerns, their expectations from a bill being discussed in the House of Commons or in committee. Have you met MPs from the House of Commons to discuss Bill C-18?
Thank you, Mr. Champoux. Yes, we have met with some MPs and some senators to discuss our concerns with Bill C-18, and all of those interactions and engagements are recorded in the lobbyist registry as required by Canadian law.
C'est très intéressant ce que
Very interesting what you are saying. I never received an invitation to meet with representatives of Meta, whereas I think we could have had very interesting conversations and to advance our respective ideas. Have you had discussions with government representatives directly during discussions, during debates around C-18?
Yeah, Mr. Champoux, look, we would love to meet with you about Bill C-18, and we can certainly rectify that very quickly. We'd love to have a conversation with you about it and about the amendments we've proposed.
Ça aurait été peut-être avant qu'on vote pour l'envoi.
That should have been done before we vote to send it to the Senate. It's already in the Senate. The time for discussion was when it was here in committee, so that may be late already. I understand that you had meetings with government representatives. Were your concerns heard? Do you have the impression that you got responses? Please tell me how it went on. Yes. We were almost not invited to the committee the first time, so I'm very happy to know that we still have an opportunity to meet with you, so we will schedule that as soon as possible. For the government, yes, we had representations with the government. The government explained that this was something on the platform and that it could not be changed. And that was the end of our discussion. But we also shared changes that we were proposing, the same thing for this committee and the same thing for the senatorial committee. Very well. We'll talk about that later. Let me come back to today's meeting because just like my other colleagues, I'm very frustrated to see that Mr. Clegg did not appear. Mr. Chan, I understand that you were part of the reflections and that you may have advised him in that direction. No, that is not what I said. I said that my advice was confidential. Well, yes, you are right. You were part of the reflections. I'm just saying that if you found it relevant that he be here, you might have insisted for him to appear, but that's not the concern I have. The fact is that this committee, after discussing to change the format, propose an invitation to Facebook expecting collaboration from Meta and Mr. Clegg's commitment to appear. But the wording was very clear from the 20th of March. The words were public on the 20th of March. So you knew what the title of the study was, the title of the motion. I'm trying to understand the attitude that causes a president like Mr. Clegg to change his mind, whereas he gave his word that he was going to appear. He already knows the content of the motion being studied. I must confess that I found that not ordinary at all. I understand your question. Let me start by saying that Mr. Clegg is a very honorable man, but I cannot explain to you what he was thinking. But for me, it wasn't clear at all that the two were related, that the motion of the 20th of March was tied to the invitation we received. There was an email that was sent saying we were invited to appear for the study on C18. We were delighted. So you were not aware that the summons that was sent following the motion passed here on the 20th of March, on which you communicated with a clerk to say that you were not comfortable with the summons, but that you would willingly accept to collaborate if it was an invitation? Well, I'm not aware of that. But, as I said, I only saw a letter by email. It was an invitation to discuss Bill C-18. And we are always transparent. We want to work in collaboration with you. So you are telling me that you were not aware that the invitation letter was related to a summons that had been sent a week before that was also related to a motion passed here in committee on the 20th of March? You made no link with that? Mr. Shampoo, I know that may be difficult for you to understand, but for those who are not experts in parliamentary procedure, Mr. Clegg is a parliamentary expert. He's a former vice president in Britain. He's our president of global affairs. I believe that he allows others the opportunity to read invitation letters. Mr. Chan, do you understand that members of this committee are frustrated, justified frustration because of this situation, the absence of Mr. Clegg, and the reasons you are giving us today that you didn't establish a link between the letter and the summons that had been sent a week before? Tell me what you understand. Do you understand that we are irritated by that?
We are frustrated too. We really wanted Mr. Clegg to appear here. He was eager to appear to discuss the Online News Act and to discuss Bill C-18. We received last-minute notice on Thursday evening last week that the title of this hearing would be changed, and we took that, understandably, as a very significant change to the framing of the hearing, that it would not be about Bill C-18, it would be on a suite of other matters altogether. And on that basis, Mr. Clegg decided not to appear. But look, he was really looking forward to being here and to talking about Bill C-18 and to talking about the impact of that bill on Canadians and globally.
OK. Il y a peut-être la couenne un petit peu... Oui. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
I now go
Thank you, Madam Chair.
to Julian. Peter, 6 minutes, please.
Although
everybody's going over 6 minutes, and I'm allowing you to have equal time, so go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Echoing the questions that Mr. Champo has just asked are very legitimate questions. Mr. Clegg is a seasoned parliamentarian. He didn't know the relation between the summons and the letter. There was confusion. Well, I found that difficult to believe. And the fact that he is ready to come appear, well, he could come here next Monday responding to our summons. And he can come answer our questions next Monday. We shall see. I am skeptical in light of some of the answers you've given, but I understand that in some cases,
the product team that is currently working on what I perceive to be a threat to parliamentarians and our democracy, saying that you will respond if Bill C-18 is passed in the Senate. Is that product team examining at this point limiting access by Canadians to emergency services information? You can understand that when it is an emergency, people need information immediately, that Meta did that in Australia, and Meta may be looking at doing that in Canada. I find absolutely reprehensible.
Thank you, Mr. Julian, and through the chair, no, it's our intention that none of those pages that are not, in fact, news pages will be blocked or removed or removed from access for Canadians. And so we were working very carefully to ensure that doesn't happen. And Mr. Julian, this is a business decision that we're being forced to make by this legislation. We wish we were not in this position. We don't want to have to make this decision. But if we are forced to make it, we will remove news in a way that's very careful, that is responsible, that is transparent. We'll make sure Canadians still have access to emergency pages, to government pages, to community service organizations, and to politicians' pages as well, Mr. Julian.
Thank you. It didn't happen in Australia. Reprehensibly, Meta blocked access for Australians, and I think you're not reassuring us today that Meta will not do the same thing. What are Meta's profits last year in Canada? What were the revenues raised in Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Julian. We don't break out Canadian revenue. I can confirm that Meta's revenue for the last quarter, I believe, was in the order of $13 billion.
So with those... and my other question that I imagine you will not respond to is what were taxes paid in Canada in the last year? There have been a lot of concerns raised about Meta not paying its fair share of taxes. Can you share those figures with us?
Yeah, we can follow up to give you a number for that, Mr. Gillian. I can confirm that we do pay all the taxes we're required to pay in Canada. That includes corporate tax, that includes payroll tax, that includes GST and HST. So, Mr. Gillian, we do pay our taxes in Canada. I can give you that figure once I've followed up to get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate getting your overall revenues in Canada, because then, of course, we can determine, and Canadians can determine whether it's a fair share of taxes. It's in the billions of dollars, of course, we know this, and with the billions of dollars, you seem unaware that C-18 was substantially changed through this committee process. The NDP tabled a whole range of amendments that actually put the focus on small local news organizations. And both in your testimony to begin, Mr. Chan, you didn't seem to be aware of those amendments passing and the overall impact that it has in the thrust of the bill. The PBO report that you cited, it took place before all of these amendments were brought forward by the NDP to actually put in place a framework that favors local businesses that and community businesses that are providing information in communities across the country. Are you aware of those amendments being passed?
Well, Mr. Julian, I have to say on these sorts of matters, we do take advice from our legal counsel, and our legal counsel continues to advise that the scope is unprecedented across the Western world. It ingests all news links. It ingests audio-visual content.
Yeah,
and would make us pay for something that we don't put on our system.
Yeah, my question was very simple. Were you aware of those amendments? You don't appear to have been.
I did not say that, Mr. Julian. I want to be accurate for the record.
Were you aware of those amendments?
Our legal counsel has advised.
Were you aware of those amendments? That's my simple question. Yes or no? Were you aware of those amendments?
I'm aware of amendments, but unfortunately, my legal counsel has
advised. So you were aware in
advised.
Giving your presentation that it was inaccurate. I find that
Mr. Julian, I don't know that that's accurate at all.
Yes, if you were.
Please allow Mr. Julian to finish his sentence.
Thank you. I would now like to go to concerns that have been raised about Facebook and Meta doing little to counter the use of their platforms to spread hateful, false information from conspiracy theories. Also, in Europe, we have initiatives that have taken place to flag content that incites and advocates extremism. Content must be removed from the web within the hour. Is Meta cooperating with European authorities that are trying to crack down on what has been seen as hateful extremism that Meta has permitted online? Is Meta cooperating with the European authorities?
Of course, Mr. Julian. As we have indicated, and I believe you have been also present for some of these discussions, we have very strict content policies that go well above the rule of law in terms of what the laws require us to remove. We remove harmful content. We remove terrorist content. We remove violent extremist content. So yes, Mr. Julian, we do very much cooperate and welcome further opportunities to do so.
So the message today is you will follow the law as adopted by Parliament, by the House of Commons, and by the Senate. And thank you, Madam. Thank you.
To answer the question. Very short and quick. Thank you.
Oh, of course, we've always done so.
Thank you very much. And now we move into the second round. And we will have a 5-minute round this time, and the begin will be the Conservatives. Mr. Shields, 5 minutes, please, Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate witnesses always being here. Appreciate all the witnesses being here, no matter what the context. I think what we found in the last time when we had finally, appreciate you coming, but finally the people that we were looking to come to understand the frustration that we had when the appropriate people do not come. It makes it very difficult for us to have a good clarity in the questions because those people can answer them. So when you see our frustration, concern that we are not getting to where we were, I find it with the resources that you have to suggest that you did not know what that original motion was, and finding out about it late last week, what that motion originally was, whether I agree or disagreed with it. I find with your resources, that's just highly unlikely to have happened, that you would have known what that motion was a long time ago when it was passed. You have incredible resources. So for somebody to take that now and say, oh, I'm not coming because of that one, it really taints the conversation in the room. It really does. No matter what your position are, what mine might be, but the experts in the room that we need to have here make those conversations much more useful. So having said that, I'm going to go specifically to, and as has been already alluded to, the contracts that you've already signed. Now, it's been reported that you have 14 of those contracts signed in Canada now. Is that true?
We have 18 now,
18?
Mr. Shields, yes.
Would you define who those 18 are?
Mr. Shields, through the chair, the content of those deals and who they are signed with is a matter of commercial confidence.
Okay, understand that. Now, my honorable colleague here suggested that they had amendments that approved that would help support local newspapers, but he didn't support ours that would supported one journalism, which in my writing of 13 weekly papers, we have a number of those with one journalist. They have not had an agreement with you. Are you going to have an agreement with them?
Thank you, Mr. Shields, for the question. And through the chair, we share your concerns that it is not small and local publishers and news outlets that will benefit from this bill. In fact, as the Parliamentary Budget Officer has recently confirmed, more than 75% of the funds which are purported to be raised under this bill are going to go to the most profitable and highly subsidized broadcasters in Canada. So in fact, Mr. Shields, that's one of our other concerns with this bill, is it's not going to help small local journalists like the ones in your riding.
But yet you've gone out and made agreements with 18 others. Why aren't you making agreements with those independent small ones? If you can take the time to do the 18, why aren't you doing those ones?
Well, Mr. Shields, we would welcome a conversation with the CEO of your publication if that is what you are seeking. I think that would be very appropriate.
So you like the names of the 13 weekly papers in my writing owned by the one journalist operations, and you would meet with them and make a deal with them?
Well, we have before, Mr.
No,
Shields.
you didn't.
No, not in your particular writing,
Ah,
but we
thank
have.
you.
But we have met with other one-person operators or owners, as you say.
You want to give me an example of one of those?
Sure, we've met with IndieGraph, Aaron Miller. We've met with Jeremy, I forget his last name, but starts with a K, at the Sprawl in Calgary. I guess what I'm reacting to maybe is to clarify, Mr. Shields, if you are under the impression that we have not talked to small publishers, in fact, it's the opposite. We've spent most of our time with small publishers.
But you've made no agreements with them.
I believe that we have some agreements with, I'm trying to remember, we have an agreement with IndieGraph and with the Discourse.
And those are one journalist?
I think they might be two, to be honest. I'm not sure exactly, but I think by anyone's definition, a very small publication.
In my 13 in my writing, that's what we live on, by the way.
Well, we would be very pleased to speak with them, especially out from under the challenge of C18.
You will get those names.
Thank you,
I'll
sir.
be looking forward to those conversations having happened.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Martin. I will go to the Liberals now. Oh, Lisa Hefner. Lisa, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chan, are you aware of the U.S. antitrust lawsuits against Google's dominance in ad tech? And I'm asking specifically about the lawsuit that alleges Google and Facebook illegally agreed not to compete with one another on ad tech, which is a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
I don't think I'm familiar with that particular part. I am aware of the
Okay, let me go on and give you a little bit more details. We've seen some information coming out of this lawsuit that shows evidence of market rigging between Facebook and Google. To be specific, Facebook signed a quid pro quo agreement with Google to kill the rival ad tech called header bidding in return for special privileges for Facebook. So header bidding was an alternate ad tech that news publishers were embracing in order to increase their online ad revenues. How does Meta expect news organizations to innovate in the digital space when it colludes with Google to kill rival ad technologies?
Well, I'm happy to take that, ma'am. I mean, in Canada, you don't have to look. I'm sorry, ma'am?
Through the chair,
Oh,
please.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I should just point out that you don't have to look at the United States, Madam Chair. We can just look in Canada. Jeff Elgie, who runs Village Media, has his own ad tech platform that he just launched to much acclaim, and he has been and continues to be a long-time colleague and
back
partner of ours.
to back to the
and
California.
we have no intention,
sorry, sir,
of course.
back to the California lawsuit that we were talking about. It shows that Google knew header bidding increased publishers' ad revenues by 30 to 40%. That's for the news publishers. And in return for killing that technology that benefited the news publishers, Google guaranteed that Facebook would win 10% of ad bids on Google's server. So my question is, what is Meta's increase in ad revenue since Sheryl Sandberg signed that agreement with Google back in September 2018? How much did Meta gain with this scheme to the detriment of news publishers?
I'm not aware. I believe that a lot of this probably will be best addressed to Google.
Perhaps you can give us the Facebook data in writing after this meeting if you don't have it on hand. But really the question is, how can you state you're a partner to news organizations and small businesses when you're working behind the scenes with Google to hurt those same businesses, hurt their innovation and their ability to grow online?
Well, Madam Chair, I mean, I get my Globe and Mail delivered to me every day. Still, I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I enjoy actually flipping through it every day and seeing, in fact, the partnership that we have with the Canadian press. Are you aware, ma'am, that every article written by one of our news fellows, there is a byline at the end that talks about how these fellows are made possible through a partnership. So
Great. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that
Canadian
exactly.
press.
So Facebook has a journalism project. In 2019, your company announced it would donate $300 million to the news business with a special focus on local journalism. But research from Columbia's II Center for Journalism found that 29.4 million was actually allocated to local U.S. news organizations. And furthermore, about half of the 500 plus newsrooms received one grant only of about $5,000 each. So why did you allocate only 10% of your initial commitment to that journalism fund?
I believe it was a global fund that was announced. We have spent $8 million in Canada with respect to programs with news publishers and partnerships. That includes our Canadian Press News Fellowship Program.
I just want to point out, thank you, sir, I want to point out that this fund actually represents a very small percentage of what Facebook paid under the News Media Bargaining Code in Australia and what it would be mandated to pay under C18. And then I want to go into a little bit about your statement that news has no value to Facebook. We know that Facebook collects millions of data points on its users, 21.5 million Canadian users. And your company has pushed back against regulation internationally that would limit your ability to harvest data for ad tracking. So are you really telling us that the data collected on a content a user views on your platform is of no value to Meta?
Well, ma'am, if I may, Madam Chair, I will, with apologies to my journalism and publisher colleagues, I think what we're saying, as we have said elsewhere, is that this type of content, news links, et cetera, they're highly substitutable. So,
how much time do you, okay, thank you.
Sharon, did you want to finish your answer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is highly substitutable. What that means is if the content were not there, people would nonetheless engage with other kinds of content.
I thought journalism that has been sourced is not there, people will find other sources of information. That's very illuminating.
I think
Thank you, Mr.
I think
Chan.
that's fair.
And now I'm going to go to Martin Champeau from the bloc. 2.5 minutes, please, Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame Curran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Curran, a while ago, you talked about Meta's last quarter revenue. Did you talk about 30 billion of income globally?
13 billion in North America for the last quarter, Mr. Champeau.
En Amérique du Nord.
In North America. Good. You also said earlier, I think it was in Mr. Chan's opening remarks, that the sharing of news content represents less than 3%. Do you know what is a drop in the ocean of Meta? That is probably what bread and butter represents for the survival of small publishers. Okay, let's look at the general situation. 3% of 30 billion is 900 million in North America. This 900 million generated by the exchange of new news content. 900 million may not be a lot for Meta or Facebook, but that could save a company like those in Mr. Schill's writing. Don't you think that these figures should be taken more seriously? Mr. Champeau, I think sometimes in the society, we need to have a debate on principles. And it doesn't work. A principle where the concept, the open internet concept is being attacked. The free and open internet content is being attacked. We are not attacking a free and new content. We are talking about the content creators, those who don't really have a choice today because it's a new way of communicating. People find themselves in the platforms and search engines, and that's where they find information. These content creators do not have a choice. If they had a choice, maybe they will not find themselves in your platforms. They either go there or they die. So my question once again, Mr. Chan and Ms. Curran, you talked about 30 billion in revenue in North America. Last quarter, about 900 million. Let's say it's just 500,000 that comes from news content. I think that this is a figure that every news organization would want. I think it's a mistake to say to find actually the type of content is not equal to the amount of money we make. The money we receive comes from small and medium-sized enterprises that want to publish ads. You sell ads. They are trying to reach 24 million Canadians.
I'm going to go to Mr. Julian for 2.5 minutes, Peter.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Meta is telling us that they want to respect the committee, but Mr. Clark refused to appear here today. Meta has talked about transparency, but they don't want to give us figures of the income that they raised in Canada. You are here to talk about C-18, and you have admitted that even though the bill has changed significantly, you keep talking about the initial version instead of the reality. So I'm somewhat skeptical when it comes to the good faith of Meta in that regard. In addition, there are some serious allegations that have been made.
Madam Chair, of the horrific allegations contained in reports recently about Facebook amplifying hate, both the Amnesty International report that found that Facebook amplified hate ahead of the Rohingya massacre in Myanmar. We have the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that has talked about Facebook letting activists incite ethnic massacres with hate and misinformation in Ethiopia. We have reports that Facebook's ethical failures are not accidental. They are part of the business model. So how do you respond to these serious, egregious allegations of Facebook and Meta amplifying the most horrific human rights violations, and that the ethical failures are part of a business model? How do you respond to those allegations, and why should we believe you now when you come to this committee and say that you want to respect laws and respect Canadian values?
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Look, I think I can say this. Our community standards prohibit hate speech. They prohibit misinformation on our platforms. We have large teams working around the world to remove content that's forbidden by our community standards, and that includes hate speech or any content that would incite people to violence. And we work very hard to remove that. It's not perfect. Our enforcement systems aren't perfect, but they're getting better every year. And we report on those results transparently and publicly in our Transparency Center so that Canadians know, so that parliamentarians know that we're holding ourselves to a certain standard and that we're improving all the time in meeting our goals.
Thank you. The time is up for this round of questioning. And I'm going to go to Ms. Gladue from the Conservatives. Marilyn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. So I think I'm going to pick up on the topic that I left off with last time, and that has to do with the fact that since I have been on this committee studying C-18, I have been explaining, as a person who is in business for over 30 years, that if the government brings in a plan that says if you allow the sharing of news links, you have to pay, a business reaction that is logical is to say, then I won't allow the sharing of news links so I don't have to pay. Mr. Chan, does that seem like a logical business decision?
That is an eminently logical conclusion, ma'am.
Thank you. And so it seems to me that the shock and surprise that is being expressed by the other parties, as if it's something unthinkable that Facebook is doing. This is exactly the reaction that was predicted. This is exactly what happened in Australia. Now, let me talk about the Australian situation. You mentioned that you are now not under the Australian legislation. Could you describe how, after there was blocking of information in response to the Australian legislation, what led to Australians being able to see content again?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Ms. Gladue. And through the chair, yes, we're not actually designated under the Australian legislation. It does not apply to us or to any other platform. And so one of the key differences between the legislation in Australia and Canada is that the Australian legislation allowed time for a process to unfold, whereby we could reach what we call an untidy and short-term compromise for news to remain on our platforms, and that's currently where it sits now. If we were to be designated under the Australian legislation, I think the outcome would be very similar to what we are signaling here.
Thank you. And so knowing that Canadians do not want to lose their ability to share news links, they certainly enjoy that, and Australians didn't either, has the Liberal government approached you in any way to have the similar conversations that were held in Australia to preserve the ability for Australians to share news content?
Thank you, Ms. Gladue, and through the chair. One of the problems with the Canadian legislation is that it doesn't actually allow for any kind of discussions like that or a process to unfold before we are designated and subject to the framework contained in Bill C-18. And so we are virtually automatically designated under this framework as soon as the bill and the regulations are finalized. And so one of the amendments we have proposed is that we should not be automatically designated under the legislation to allow for some time for those discussions to happen. As it stands, the Canadian framework does not allow for that.
And Mr. Chan, my understanding is that you mentioned you were at Senate committee and that it was actually a productive discussion with respect to the amendments. What amendments did they seem to be favorable to that you would like to see modifying C-18?
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. Yeah, so one of the things we spoke to senators about and they seemed interested in was the preservation of copyright principles. This is what the EU has done in a similar context with respect to news publishers. So we are, there is no, not value, there is no monetary compensation required for the posting of links or snippets in the EU, and so that protects and preserves copyright principles. We suggested that that was something that might be looked at in Canada as well, and senators were quite interested in that proposal.
Yes, certainly the Supreme Court in Canada decided there should be no monetary value for links, and so that would be consistent with what the courts have said, although not consistent with the legislation the Liberal government has brought forward. One of the concerns I have about C-18 is that the CRTC will be involved in the oversight, and they have said that they currently don't have experience in oversight in digital platforms. Do you share my concern?
Thank you, Ms. Gladue, and through the chair, we can't speak to the CRTC's current resourcing. My understanding is that they are not currently resourced to deal with this legislation or to implement it, and that they would need to acquire the resources to do that.
Final question then. I have recommended that the government consider abandoning C-18 in favor of models like Taiwan, where monies can be brought in that would actually benefit the local and smaller media outlets. Are you involved in any relationships like that in the world?
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. And through the chair, we have certainly signed a number of deals with Canadian publishers to support the work they're doing and to support, in particular, new and innovative business models. Look, a central fund model would be very different from what's proposed in C-18. I think in principle, that would be a model that would be easier for us to support.
To the Liberals, Mr. Biddle, for 5 minutes, please, Chris.
Thank you very much. And again, this is disappointing. This whole exercise has once again shown Facebook's contempt for not only our democracy, but we've seen across the world contempt for democracies around the world. I've heard from you, Mr. Chan, multiple times, me and other committees as well, and it really is your willingness to only answer questions if there's softball from the Conservative Party. Even to start this, to say, oh, we didn't know, the motion passed by this committee was the committee undertake a study on tech giants' current and ongoing use of intimidation and subversion tactics to evade regulation in Canada and across the world. And to pretend you didn't know that, I doubt you didn't do your homework, Mr. Chan. So it's disappointing that you would come here and mislead the committee on that. You mislead the committee on other items. You say news outlets get hundreds of millions of dollars in free advertising, but leave out the part that your company is engaged in monopolistic practices that takes the vast majority of ad revenue. So that free advertising is worthless. I'd like to ask you, though, about a 2018 meeting between the British Culture Secretary and Mark Zuckerberg, your CEO, who threatened British lawmakers to pull out investment out of the UK if the government did not look to soften its stance on tech regulation. Can you explain why your company would go to these lengths against legislation that seeks to protect children online?
I'm not aware of that meeting.
Fair enough. But you agree with me, though, Mr. Chan, that everyone keeps talking about different countries, different regulations. You're a massive company that does not want to be regulated. And you will go to lengths at any point to avoid that regulation. I'll ask you, are you familiar with the term astroturfing?
I believe you asked that question of Google, and
I'm asking that of you, Mr. Chan.
And I learned of it through that, and now I am informed.
Excellent. There are about 13 nonprofits, all backed by Meta, currently blitzing through state houses to kill online harms legislation. These same organizations have consistently lobbied against all forms of tech regulation, be it anti-sex trafficking laws or antitrust reform, while failing to disclose their financial links to big tech. Nonprofits like NetChoice, backed by Meta for the last 8 years, are even coordinating litigation right now to oppose legislation in numerous states. Is Meta currently funding any Canadian third-party organizations that have lobbied or advocated on behalf of tech regulations in Canada?
No.
Meta has listed all third-party U.S. organizations it funds in the United States on its political engagement page. Can you provide will you commit to provide a similar list of Meta-funded Canadian third-party organizations? If you do undertake that, or we find out that you do, which is probably more likely?
If I wish we had, wish we had money to spend these days on these sorts of things. But if you would like a
yes,
list,
you're just a little upstart that's struggling in the world,
well,
Mr. Chan.
I have to say,
Mr. Chan,
I want to answer, Madam Chair. May I answer
Chan,
the question?
Mr. Chan,
Madam Chair, may I answer the question?
No, Mr. Chan,
I
this
have
is
an
my
answer.
time. It's not your time.
It's Mr. Biddle's time to ask questions.
Well, I have an answer, though, Madam Chair.
No, Mr. Chan, we're going to move on.
Oh.
We're going to move on, Mr. Chan, because clearly, again, it's nothing but contempt and evasiveness. I can ask softball questions like members of the Conservative Party, and I know you'll answer those directly, quickly, and succinctly. But it's weird to me, and I think it's weird to Canadians to say, on one hand, news isn't important to our platform. It's only 3%. It's not important, even though we want to be a trusted source of information. But on the other hand, you're entering into deals with 18 publishers, of which we have no idea who they are. You are picking the favorites. We're trying to balance the playing field. So is news important? Or on the other hand, you're saying we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on news and enter into deals, and we are good players, even though we're a small tech startup that struggles to get by day to day. Which one is it, Mr. Chan?
I need to just clarify a few things that are misinformed in that statement.
No. Specifically to my last comment, yes, please go ahead.
So we actually have, if you're looking for the list of companies that we have supported, I'm now reminded, we do have annual reports that we release in Canada every year that show actually who we do fund and who we support. Things like Canada 2020 in the past, things like Equal Voice, organizations like Octiva in Ottawa, things like the Broadbent Institute. And so we're happy to provide those for you. They are public. I believe they've been subject to access to information requests, and we'd be very pleased to share those with you, and I will ensure that we do that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's the end of that time. Now, I need to speak to the committee. You wanted to take 15 minutes out of this meeting. It would mean that we could have a third round if this committee is interested, but it would be a 3-minute, 3-minute, 1.5 minute, 1.5 minute, 3-minute, 3-minute round. Are you in agreement to do that? That would give us 15 minutes in all. That would mean we would have 10 minutes with a little 5-minute overrun for the 15-minute meeting. Ms. Gladue.
Just to clarify, Chair, I thought that we had just started into sort of the next round where we had 5 and the Liberals had 5, and so the next would be 2.5, 2.5. Is that wrong? Okay, no, we just finished the round.
We just finished that.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
fine then. That'd
All
be
right,
fine,
that's
too.
fine. Okay, well, I'll begin then. I'll go to Mr. Waugh for 3 minutes. Kevin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's lots of talk about disinformation in Canada. I mean, we just saw it. Liberal Convention brought it out. There is disinformation. Shame on news sources in this country, whether it's Meta or Google or CTV or Global or even the prize, the CBC. I see on Meta platform, people are always seem to be hacked. How does one hack? Every day I see friends that are hacked.
Sir, it would depend on a bunch of different things, but one way oftentimes that it happens is someone gets sent a malicious email and they click on it and that reveals certain information on the computer to the person who's trying to hack, and then they're able to then take control of certain accounts or the computer in question.
So with this new policy, or talked about policy at the Liberal Convention about misinformation, and it says here there will be money available, public funds to support this. Would Meta be at the table for money from the Liberal Party if this policy becomes law through the Liberal government?
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. If there are government funds on offer to Meta, we would apply for those. Absolutely.
Yeah, see, this was the issue I had with this proposal that came up on the weekend. It's the most ridiculous thing because we have all seen misinformation, not only on social media. I mean, I was a broadcaster for over 40 years. There was information during my time that was spread on local news. I mean, I've seen it. And you just shake your head. You know, you go back in time. Ms. Curran, I think you want to answer some of this.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, Mr. Waugh, through the chair. I think if I could just respond to this question about the value of news, though, which I know you've raised also. I think when we're talking about the value, we believe that news has a real social value. The problem is that it doesn't have much of an economic value to Meta. That's the real concern with this legislation. So if we are being asked to compensate news publishers for material that has no economic value to us, that's where the problem is. We agree, though, Mr. Waugh, that news has a real social value and that it's entirely appropriate for legislators and policymakers like yourself, particularly if you've been involved in the industry, to think about how to support the news industry as it transitions into the digital world.
It hasn't done a very good job transitioning. I mean, it has just been brutal with the newspapers, the firewalls, the attempts that they have. I mean, it has been disastrous from day one.
Thank you. We now go to the Liberals. Anthony Housefather. For 3 minutes,
Thank
please,
you.
Anthony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to come back to the issue of Australia because, again, I'm concerned about the content blocking that happened in Australia and the overreach and making sure that this does not happen here. Whistleblower documents state that Facebook violated its own company policies during the gradual rollout of the takedown on February 17, 2021. Facebook ignored error signals at the 10% mark, 25% mark, 50% mark, as senior executives ordered the full rollout to take effect within hours, where errors would normally have paused the rollout. One example, again, of a weird thing that happened is Facebook policies, which you both know very well, require prior content review and cross-checking of lists of sensitive accounts, including accounts of critical online infrastructure to avoid harmful overblocking of content. Whistleblowers reported that for the Australia takedown, apparently for the first time in history, Facebook did not develop or utilize lists of sensitive accounts before activating the Australian takedown, which threatened COVID vaccine rollouts, response to wildfires, and more. In response to other Facebook employees who were trying to fix the overblocking, an Australian response team member posted acknowledgement that guidance from the policy and legal teams has been to be over-inclusive in blocking. So, Ms. Curran, you were very nicely answering my questions before. Can you confirm that you will not be over-inclusive in blocking and that you will develop a list of sensitive accounts to avoid overblocking?
Thank you, Mr. Housefather, for the question, and through the chair, yes, it is absolutely our intention not to make the same errors in Canada that we made in Australia. We're working very hard to make sure that's not the case. And in fact, of course, the way we do this is going to depend by necessity on the final scope of C18 and, how it emerges from Parliament. But we're going to, and we will be absolutely transparent with parliamentarians and with Canadians. Happy to have a conversation with your office about these details as well, Mr. Housefather.
I'm happy to do that. Could I just also confirm that you will not block government IP addresses? Because I think that was another thing that in Australia that happened that could be avoided.
Yes, Mr. Housefather, we are not going to block government pages, emergency service pages, community organizations. Some of the things that were mistakenly scooped into scope in Australia, we're working very hard to make sure we do not do that this time.
Was there a post-mortem done of the Australian situation? I mean, one would think that with such a huge overreach, there would have been a very, very quick post-mortem to make sure that the process didn't repeat itself. Was there a post-mortem that was done?
Yes, my understanding is there was, and that is informing the way that we are proceeding with ending the availability of news in Canada as well.
To the extent that you're able to, would you be able to share the findings of the postmortem, at least the high-level findings, so that we could see what will not be repeated based on what you've learned?
We'd be happy to follow up with your office, Mr. Housefather, and have that conversation.
And my last question is, in Australia, there was no appeals mechanism.
You have
will there
1
be an
second. I'm sorry. You're on out of time.
Yes,
Ms.
the
Cowan,
answer is yes, Mr.
please send that information to the committee and not simply to Mr. Housefather. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Martin, 1.5 minutes, please.
Ça va aller rapidement, Madame la Présidente.
That will be fast, Madam Chair. Thank you. I'll come back to the importance of news content that we could find on platforms like Meta. 3% of content from users has to do with news. You said 1.9 billion clicks was received last year, and you see that this is free marketing worth $230 million. So there's a certain value attached to that content and that market. My question has to do with the interest that Facebook or Meta will have following C18's adoption. You said you have agreements with 18 media outlets already. Unfortunately, in spite of the fact that you don't think that there's much value to it, you are still signing agreements with press organizations. Well, I wonder about that. If C18 passes, will initiative be taken like those to support local journalism? Will these initiatives or agreements will continue? Will Facebook remain interested in local journalistic content? Mr. Shampoo, I think it depends entirely on how C18 is adopted. Finally, if you want it to be very wide as a framework, it could have an impact. If it's more limited in scope, it could mean something else. So we are waiting for the Parliament to decide.
Martin, nicely done. I'm going to go to Peter. Peter, 1.5 minutes, please.
Yes, and since I'm the final questioner, Madam Chair, No, we don't have time. I will be the last questioner if we want to take the 15 minutes. No? Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to come back to Ms. Curran, who said just a few weeks ago, I would say we're still looking at all of the options based on our evaluation of the legislation, and that is in response to a question of is Meta going to act the same way it did in Australia? Looking at all of the options. But I understand in your response to Mr. Housefather, you are saying under oath that Meta will not be impacting health emergency information, will not be restraining or suspending information that people need, as they're seeing now in Alberta around wildfires, around emergency services as well. All of those things that took place in Australia in the most reprehensible way, people being denied access to information that is actually critical for them, perhaps to save their property, often to save the loved one. And Meta denied that information to them. Are you saying, under oath now, that will not happen, that Meta in no way will impede Canadians' access to information that is fundamental for their health and safety and the health and safety of their community, that Meta will not do that again?
That's correct, Mr. Julian. We're working very hard to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes in Canada that we made in Australia when we remove news from our platform, and that we don't take down pages we don't mean to take down and that don't fit the definition of news.
We have 15 seconds, and so I will ask.
I don't have 15 seconds on my
reiterate
book.
that we would like to have the
Mr.
documentation
Julian.
that has been requested over the last few weeks, including the information that you would have committed to give to Mr. Housefather. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That's very good. Now, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing here, and I'd like us to suspend so that we can go into the 15 minutes of business. Thank you very much, Mr. Chan and Ms. Kern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So reprehensible.
Monday, March the 27th.
Sure. So, Chair, I did bring forward a motion earlier. Out of respect for the committee and for the witnesses that we had that day, I did agree to put it aside and then to discuss more fully today. It's based on a letter that we received from the Auditor General on April 19th. She expressed to us that she was interested in coming to committee if we were interested in having her. And it was, of course, with regards to a report that she wrote on connectivity in rural and remote areas. I acknowledge that this report, it blends between this committee and industry committee, but the Auditor General is very clear in her report that some of the funding does come from Heritage, and she is also very clear in her letter that this is one of the committees that she would be looking forward to attending should we invite her. And so my motion is that considering the Auditor General report tabled on Monday, March 27th, titled The Progress on Access to High-Speed Internet and Mobile Cellular Services, Lags Behind for Rural and Remote Communities and First Nations Reserves, the committee invite Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, to testify before committee as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours.
Second. Thank you. Mr. Biddle, sorry.
I'd raised this earlier, and I guess I didn't have a concern at the time, but my understanding is that the bloc would move a almost identical motion at the industry committee. So I know on an issue like sport, we were specific to really make sure that we were focusing on something very different from status of women, and we didn't want to duplicate particular. It has been moved. It has been moved. So I don't know if we want to be more specific in terms of what we're doing rather than calling all the same witnesses, or if we're just calling the Auditor General. But if we're calling the Auditor General in both committees to deal with the exact same thing, this is Mrs. Thomas is right that it does have a heritage element, but I think we can all agree that this is pith and substance, to go back to my law school days, pith and substance something that is in the jurisdiction of the industry committee. So I'd like to hear from others in terms of not duplicating our efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Then Ms. Gladue.
Merci, Madame. Moi, je pense que...
Thank you. I think it's very important for the Auditor General to appear in committee following this information. As Mr. Bittle has said, I think that falls under industry. If we want to talk about the content, what people don't have access to when it comes to information, that's something else. I think we will have to make sure that it's that relevant. I think that it mostly falls under the industry committee, where the work could be done more broadly and cover things that relate to Canadian heritage. But I would also like to know what the other members of the committee think. But I think we may be duplicating the invitation and asking the Auditor General to appear before two committees. That may be too much.
Thank you, Marilyn, and then Peter.
Thank you, Chair. My concern would be, even though the motion has been brought forward at industry, they have numerous things on their agenda, and so I'm not sure whether they've agreed to schedule it or where that is at. That said, there is monies coming out of Heritage going towards this effort. I at least would be interested to know what those are and how successful they've been in achieving the objective.
Yes, I don't know if industry has agreed to and adopted the motion here. We're just discussing a motion. We haven't adopted it yet, so just wanted to point that out. We're just trying to get a sense of what everyone thinks. Peter.
I support it, and I hope we vote in the next 6 minutes on it, Madam Chair. I understand there is overlapping. There is no doubt. Industry can choose to do that as well. The difficulty may be scheduling, because we do have a lot of things that are on our radar screen. But that being said, I think the idea of adopting the motion and putting it into the hopper is not a bad one, and I support it.
Sure. Madam Chair, my understanding then from the clerk, and maybe I'll just seek his confirmation, is that industry has not passed a motion? Okay, so industry has not passed a motion. So that's interesting to me then. The the Auditor General has written to both committees saying that she would be happy to appear at both. It was not framed as either or. And so seeing as how we're the first to discuss and the first to bring this to a vote, there's actually no reason why we can't be the ones to host it. And then industry can make a decision. If they feel that they're potentially being repetitive, then they can call it off on their end. But there's no reason that we should be holding back from doing the important work that we're called to as a committee. And that is a part of it is certainly to hear from the Auditor General in this regard. So I would ask for a vote at this time.
I was going to say that if everyone wants us to finish this on the dot, as Peter is suggesting, it'll depend on the committee members to limit their conversation. Is there anyone else wishing to speak, to or against? Mr. Biddle, no. Okay, good. All right, so I will call the question. Will the clerk, is there a sense that there's unanimous consent, or will the clerk like to call the question? Yes, sorry, Martin, before we do.
Avant le vote, Madame la Présidente.
Before the vote, Madam Chair, I understand that the motion has not yet been discussed at Indo. So no decision has been made by industry when it comes to inviting the Auditor General. So we are the first to decide to invite her or not. That's what I understand.
Yes, I think that's what Ms. Thomas was pointing out.
C'est ce que je comprends.
Thanks. Tim, quickly.
Yeah, I just want to know what the motion is, if someone can read it.
Sorry, I can read it for you. The motion is that, considering the Auditor General's report tabled on Monday, March the 27th, titled The Progress on Access to High-Speed Internet and to Mobile Cellular Services Lags Behind for Rural and Remote Communities and First Nations Reserves, the committee invite Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, to testify before committee as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours. Okay, everyone's got that motion. So we'll call the vote. Those in favor? And anyone opposed? Pardon? You're fine with it?
On division.
Yeah? Yeah? Okay, go ahead.
Division?
On division?
On consent.
Okay. All right, so as obvious that the motion passes, and I would like to call this meeting adjourned. Yes, thank you.